Our speaker this afternoon is Professor Eugene Galperin of the Math Department. And his topic is Rediscovering Mozart, an introduction to the Metropolitan Opera. Now you may say to yourself, okay, music, math, these are two unrelated subjects. Why do we have a mathematician talk about Mozart? Well, from my personal experience, most mathematicians are fond of music. You couldn't call the previous chair of math, Joe Kavanaugh, without hearing opera in the background. But did you know that listening to classical music enhances your mathematical ability? There's much evidence out there that music has a positive effect on one's ability to do math, in case you need to brush up on your scores. And we have what has been called the Mozart Effect, popularized in the 1990s, and it suggests that young children with musical instruction perform better at arithmetic. So now I think it makes more sense to have a mathematician speak about Mozart. So let's give a warm welcome to Professor Eugene Galperin.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. And, the occasion for today's talk is, and let me tell you a little bit about where I come from. Opera, at least modern opera, was invented more than 400 years ago. And originally it was a purely royal entertainment. But very soon, in 1637 to be exact, the commercial implications of the opera were recognized, and the first ever public opera house was opened in Venice, Italy. And now anyone, royalty or not, could go and see an opera for the price of admission. It took another almost 400 years. Well, I'm joking, but a new development happened, and Metropolitan Opera House, one of the greatest opera houses in New York, in the world, started the high-definition broadcast series to thousands of movie theaters around the world. And now anyone, anywhere in the world, can experience great opera for the price of a movie ticket. And there's never been a better time an easier time to experience opera than now. Almost immediately after, we're very lucky that the Stroud Mall Cinemark Theater at Stroud Mall is one of the participating theaters, and we can experience opera without leaving town. And almost immediately upon the beginning of the high-definition broadcast series, I started giving talks at various community centers. And ultimately, starting 2013, I started giving talks at ESU, and this is actually my 16th presentation at ESU, and I've given almost 100 at various locations. And I would like to dedicate my talks to my thesis advisor. Dr. Hawkes was talking about the connections between music and math. Well, my thesis advisor, Karl-Heinz Grochenik, he was holding opera discussions for graduate students at his apartment, and I am trying to continue his mission. He was certain that music and math are related. In his books, he constantly makes references to music as he talks about time frequency analysis, and he calls music mathematics for the heart. So certainly there is a connection, and I'm trying to continue my thesis advisor's mission. And this time I would like to talk, well, about Mozart, about opera in general, and about Don Giovanni. And we have to make a little excursus in history as well, and mention also some continuity, cultural continuity between Europe and the New World, while discussing an amazing person, Lorenzo da Ponte, Mozart's librettist. So, but let's start from the beginning. You know, sometimes when I think about Mozart, I think about my kids. Not because I think they're geniuses, but because they have a lot of toys. And some of their toys play music. And most of that music is Mozart. So what does that tell us? That tells us that there is something about Mozart that appeals to us on such a basic level that kids like it, and my kids like their music toys, and they love their Mozart on their toys. So what is it about Mozart's music that is so appealing to us on the basic level? And we have to make a very short excursus into history, in particular into the 18th century, about from the 1730s through 1780s, the so-called Age of Enlightenment. A wonderful, optimistic time. I wish we had hundreds of hours to talk about it, but we don't. And one of the many developments that took place then, it was good economics times in much of Europe. And what emerged is what, for lack of a better term, we might want to call the upper middle class. That is, a lot of people from non-aristocratic origin with ever-increasing economic power, who also wanted entertainment that would not involve classical learning and other such things. Also at that time, because of that rise of the formerly common people in economic terms, there slowly came a realization that, well, all people are important, not just the aristocracy. And we call that movement, we call that worldview, universal humanism. And that's really our origins today. We still have our roots in the Age of Enlightenment in the 18th century in that sense. So, and because all people came to be viewed as important, the understanding that that institution and that entertainment that does the most good for the greatest number is good and is to be cultivated. It was also lucky that Europe enjoyed the rule of a handful of so-called enlightened monarchs who bought into this worldview by and large, or at least paid lip service to it and sometimes put their money where their mouth was, and patronized this new entertainment, this new music, the music for the average person. And so what music for every person. And what resulted was the so-called classical style, or Viennese classical style, which was characterized by tuneful melodies, something that a merchant or a burgher or a well-paid professional would hum to themselves on the way back from the theater, or sing in the shower, if they had showers, or, you know, hum to themselves while getting dressed on their way to work, etc. And because it was optimistic, upward, mobile society, charm and elegance was important. Clarity of form is always characteristic of the classical style. And again, because it was upward, mobile, and optimistic, good taste and emotional restraint were important. You don't wear your heart on your sleeve when you're trying to enter society and make a good impression. And that's why emotional excesses were largely out of favor, out of style. And, well, everyone was trying to, the entertainment, the music style was there to emphasize urbanity and sophistication of those who enjoyed it. And probably the greatest, or one of the greatest exponents of that style was Mozart. And we have to hear some music. Let me play something from my kids' toys. Normally what we think, when we think of Mozart, normally this is something we're thinking about. I could go on and on, of course, but we've all heard this tune. And this is a good illustration of tuneful melodies, charming, elegant, perfect background for upscale social function, right? Or something like this, the famous Turkish Rondo. And I apologize for stopping the music. We've all heard this before many times probably. Well, unfortunately, for many of us, myself included, this is where our familiarity with Mozart ended in our childhood or early youth, and then it would take many years before we rediscover Mozart at a much more, well, serious, if you will, level. Now, of course, those charming tunes are great. And if that were all that Mozart had composed, he would still be considered a great exponent, if not the greatest, of that Viennese classical style. But that's just the beginning. And, well, let me play you something else. Remember, good taste, emotional restraint, urbanity and sophistication. Do we hear that in the next piece? Well, what do you think? Well, someone was definitely wearing their heart on the sleeve in that piece of music. Really, this is the music that's coming from the heart of a person who is confronting life's difficulties and is very unhappy about the situation, and it is reaching, you know, the music is reaching the point of panic, and it is definitely going very much against the aesthetic and the aesthetic grain of their time. So all this is going out the window in that piece of music. And let me play you something else. And is this tuneful? And is this restrained? Well, what do you think? Can you sing this in the shower? Certainly not. So, do you appreciate how shockingly ugly that was? Was that tuneful? Well, no, it was not tuneful. I would call it gestural. And if you can see some modern 20th or 21st century dance to this, but you certainly wouldn't sing or hum this to yourself. And if you think of what this music invokes, well, to me, first it invokes a scream, that high leap at the beginning. That makes it impossible to, well, very uncomfortable to sing it. No one would want to. And that's followed by some jerking or twitching or some, well, that was really ugly. And I wish we had time to hear the rest of this, but I can tell you that in the rest of this movement is turning out so horrific that at the end of it, we're very happy to hear this ugly, well, theme again, and it is extremely dramatic, very dissonant at times. And well, what about the good? It was certainly clear, the form was clear, but it was not in good taste. It was not restrained emotionally or otherwise. And the contemporaries, had they heard it, and we don't know if they ever did, would have been just profoundly shocked by this music. This is 19th century music, really not the music of Mozart's time. And Mozart composed a lot of music. Well, here is a very partial list of Mozart's composition. He died when he was very young. He died at 35. And with this many compositions, we have to ask ourselves, well, what were his priorities? Fortunately, we have an answer directly from Mozart in his own words. This is what he put on his resume, quote unquote. I'm an opera composer who also writes piano music for a living and chamber music for his friends. And all three of these statements need some clarifications. Well, chamber music, we heard some of it. That violo trio is part of Mozart's chamber music. And that is, Mozart's chamber music is probably, well, it's the best body of music probably ever composed, because it was usually music from Mozart's heart for the select few, and that's where Mozart was experimenting with harmony, with form occasionally, and certainly with emotional content. Piano music, well, the easiest way for Mozart to make some money was to walk into the concert hall, make some compositions penned down the night before, and walk out with a bunch of cash, and that's why he mentioned his piano music. Notice he didn't even mention his symphonies, because some of his best, greatest symphonies had not even been performed prior to his death, and it's usually rather difficult to stage a symphony. It takes quite a number of musicians and expense. But what about the opera? Clearly, the highest priority for Mozart was the opera. And we have to talk a little bit about the opera in general. What about the opera? Well, do we know when the Middle Ages ended and the Renaissance started? More or less up to a few decades, depending on what we do with the 14th century. But do we know when the Renaissance ended and the Baroque started? Well, historians, at least music historians, have a date and time for that. October 6th, 1600, in the afternoon. Florentine time. And that's because that's when the first work we now call an opera was premiered. And this is why that was so important, at least in art history or music history. The Renaissance was the time of the rediscovery of the art of the classical Athens. And the sculptors and the painters and the architects were the first to rediscover and reconstruct it, because they had models to follow. They could see what the classical Athenian art looked like. Musicians, on the other hand, were at a serious disadvantage, because they couldn't possibly know what the musical art of the Greeks sounded like, but they could read about it, and they could read that music was ubiquitous in the Athenian society. It accompanied everything, the weddings, the funerals, the sporting events in their entirety. They could read how musicians were very highly respected. Music was actually part of the Olympic Games, and the prizes awarded to musicians were second only to those awarded to chariot racers. And most importantly, they could read how most of the Greek tragedies were accompanied by music, either in whole or in part. And they could read what the Greek claimed the music made them feel. And the ancient Greek ideal of music was that when music is joined to the words of the drama, the emotional impact of the words is heightened 100-fold. That was the Greek ideal, and that is what the inventors of the opera in late 1500, in late 16th century, were after. They were sure that they were trying to reconstruct the musical and dramatic art of ancient Greece. And when they invented what they called, that would come to be known as opera, in a way, the Renaissance, the reconstruction of the classical Athenian art, that was complete and the new era started. But that dramatic ideal of music, that was to stay with the opera. The very purpose of opera is to give the musical expression and heighten human emotions, human conditions, and human drama. That's what opera is all about. And we may have seen in the previous clips that that's really what Mozart was all about, expressing human conditions, human emotions, and human drama. And I would like to show a clip illustrating that point, illustrating what Mozart was after, from another opera. The opera is called Così fan tutte, which can loosely be translated as They All Act This Way. And let me briefly tell you what's going on here. So this young lady, her name is Fiordiligi, Lily of the Valley. She has a boyfriend, possibly a fiancé, who was called away to the front to fight the war, or so she thinks. Meanwhile, she's being pursued by another guy. And what she's discovering as the events are unfolding is that she has been living a life imposed on her by society. And her identity, which she thought was her identity, was really imposed on her by society. And the advances of this new man are helping her discover that she's not really what she thought she was. She is really in the process of self-discovery. She is also in the process of discovery that this guy is probably infinitely better suited for her than her boyfriend. And sounds probably familiar to many of us if we've ever been to a few relationships. And she is really torn between her loyalty to her boyfriend, who is fighting a war on her behalf, or so she thinks, and this new guy who is, well, so much better suited for her. And what she is trying to do is, well, she's trying to escape. Get dressed in her boyfriend's uniform and run away to the front lines to join him there, to just run away from the temptation. And as she is getting dressed to get going, the suitor is entering and is making, well, the final push to win her heart. And in her heart and mind, she is completely ready for him. Even though she is torn and trying to escape, but she is ready. And there are subtitles, but I'll briefly tell you what's happening. The new suitor is walking in, and she's saying, "Oh my God, who let you in? I'm so miserable because of you. What do you want?" And he's saying, "Well, it's exactly because you're saying things like that I have some hope." So she's saying, "What do you want?" And she's saying, "Well, either kill me or love you, or love me. It is in me that you will find everything that you want in life." And she gives in. And the music, originally very dramatic, shifts, and we hear this huge relief that usually comes with making important decisions, and then joy that usually comes with starting a new chapter of our life, which she is thinking she is beginning. So let me play this scene. And again, this is an illustration of what Mozart was really about. Human conditions, human emotions, human drama. So, I know that was in the language of both the poetic and musical language of the 18th century, but I'm sure we all understand the emotions and the drama that was taking place and how it was expressed musically. And there were many reasons why opera was so important to Mozart. First of, well, in no particular order, for over 300 years, opera remained the single most popular form of entertainment, at least musical entertainment, in Europe, and certainly the most influential musical genre. But apart from those practical considerations, that's where Mozart's heart was, what he was interested in expressing. I'm repeating myself, human emotions, human drama, and human conditions, and that's what opera is about, joining music to words to heighten and deepen the emotional impact of the words. Mozart composed 22 operas altogether, and 7 of them, the ones highlighted in red, are staples of today's operatic repertoire. Today we'll be talking about Don Giovanni, and in general, the 3 operas that Mozart composed in collaboration with a guy named Lorenzo da Ponte are the ones that put Mozart on the map, and we need to mention Lorenzo da Ponte because actually he is closer to us than we might think. He converted to Catholicism at the age of 14, and he joined the seminary at 19. He became professor of literature at 21 and was ordained priest in Venice at 24. And Venice for Lorenzo da Ponte was like chicken coop for a fox. 6 years later, he was kicked out of Venice because he made a lot of enemies there among the clergy for writing irreverent poetry and among the husbands of aristocratic ladies for other reasons. And also one step ahead of his creditors, he ran to Vienna, where, because he really was a brilliant poet, he was appointed court librettist. And it is in his position of the court librettist, the writer of the scripts for the operas, that he collaborated with Mozart on Mozart's 3 possibly greatest operas. I have to continue the story because it's interesting and inspiring in a way. 13 years later, having made a lot of enemies in Vienna, much the way he had done in Venice, he ran further north to London. And 13 years further, having made a lot of enemies in London and not finding Europe to be anywhere in Europe to be safe for him, he moved to Elizabeth, New Jersey, where he didn't stay long, and he moved further to Sunbury, Pennsylvania, not too far from us, a lovely town of currently 10,000 people, where he thought he would be far enough from Europe that no one would find him there. And having stayed there for a bit, for 9 years, and getting bored there, he moved to Manhattan, where he ran a bookstore in Harlem, where he made a few friends at what was then called Columbia College, now Columbia University, and at the prime age of 74, he became professor at Columbia College and started his academic career in the United States, which gives hope, gives hope to folks like myself, maybe. It is interesting to say that at the age of 79, he was instrumental in creating the first opera house in New York City and in the United States. So that was quite a life, and Lorenzo da Ponte was one of those greats of the European culture who provided who enhance the cultural continuity between the old world and the new world. But part of the reason why I mentioned that more than a few details of Lorenzo da Ponte's life is we're talking about Don Giovanni after all. And I had to make a claim, a substantiated claim, that the two men who created Don Giovanni, Mozart and Lorenzo da Ponte, that they were credible, that they knew what they were talking about, and Lorenzo da Ponte certainly knew what he was talking about when he was writing his script for Don Giovanni, and anecdotes tell us that Mozart did as well. So they certainly knew what they were doing, and let's actually get to Don Giovanni, the main point of today's talk. So what's Don Giovanni? It's a very popular topic for many centuries. Many poets and writers wrote their own versions of Don Giovanni, and Da Ponte's libretto of Don Giovanni is based on is a combination of three literary sources. So ultimately, it's a story of a shameless philanderer, the personification of the male libido, unrestrained by any considerations of fear or morality or any other. And it's usually the story of his funny adventures until it ends badly when he gets thrown into hell for his transgressions. So that's, but this is a comedy. It's going to be a comedy. And so we should prepare to be entertained for 2.5 hours of music. So we've taken our seats, right, in the theater. So we can sit back, relax, and enjoy the comedy, right? Ready? There begins the comedy. You probably thought I must have put in the wrong clip, right? Because, well, our speakers certainly didn't think it was funny, and nor did the members of the audience. And so but no, that was the right clip. So what's the point of starting the comedy this way? Well, there are probably many reasons why Mozart started the comedy this way, but in no particular order, and those are just guesses. First of all, Mozart was not going to write just some kind of dumb piece of entertainment about horseplay. That's certainly way beneath him. If he was going to write an opera, he was going to create serious, high drama, comedy or not. And he is letting us know that right up front, that it is not going to be light, easy listening Viennese style, that he is telling us right away that it is going to be serious, high drama and a matter of importance. Second of all, yes, it's supposed to be a comedy, but you know what Don Giovanni is doing is, well, not really funny. Actually is, breaking hearts, and he ruins lives, and ultimately he gets thrown into hell for that. And well, we might laugh at it while we're watching it, but it's not funny if you think about it. And then it's a device that countless movie directors have used in the 20th century. An analogy would be, let's say you're about to watch a comedy, and in the first frames of the movie, what you see is a train wreck. And then the scene changes, and there begins economy. So what effect is that going to have on the rest of the movie? Well, for the rest of the movie, you're probably going to be thinking which one of the characters is going to be on that train, and that gives import, that makes us pay more attention, and that makes the otherwise passing utterances more poignant and more important. And we know that those people who are watching in the movie, that they don't some of them may not have that much left, and so everything they're doing is becoming infinitely more important because of that, well, sickening, tragic music planted in the very beginning, and that should be the effect on the listener and the viewer during the rest of the 2.5 hours of the comedy. Yes, Mozart was very interested in the opera because of the human drama that he was so good at expressing musically. But he also revolutionized opera through his German training in polyphonic technique and his great imagination in using those polyphonic techniques. What Mozart really created, well, brought to the level never seen before or never surpassed since, was the operatic ensemble. That is his ability to have several singers or actors express widely diverging views on the situation, all at the same time, all on stage. That is something opera can do, but neither theater nor movies cannot. Because in a movie or in the theater, if everyone is talking at the same time, it's going to be a mess. But in the opera, composed by a great composer, it is possible to hear multiple points of view, competing, contrasting points of view at the same time. And that's what we're going to hear in the next scene, in this opening scene. And I will tell you very briefly about this scene so that we know what we're going to look for. Mozart's music is definitely not easy listening because of so much details that he packs in every minute of it and so much going on. We are only going to hear for a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes, but we will meet 4 important characters. We will learn everything there is to know about them, and we will hear comedy, tragedy, farce, irony, everything seamlessly shifting from one to the other. And that is, for the next 60 years, all the great composers was buried up to their head in Mozart scores, trying to figure out just how Mozart did it, and eventually, 60 years later, it would get recovered. But let me tell you what's going on in this scene. Leporello, Don Giovanni's servant, is standing guard in the door while Don Giovanni is upstairs trying to seduce the daughter of the local chief of police, while the dad is probably in the next room, talking about chutzpah. And Leporello is not happy about his position. Just think about it. You know, invading the house of the chief of police. And what Leporello is singing is the following: I slave day and night for this ingrate, and is all my work appreciated? No, of course not. I'm sure some of us can identify with this sentiment. And moreover, he is upstairs with his lady. I wish I was there. And I'm freezing out here, and etc. So as Leporello, the servant, is musing on his unfortunate position there, Don Giovanni is being chased down by the daughter of the chief of police, and they're fighting. And he calls her, and she calls him a scoundrel, and he calls her an idiot, and it's a lot of noise, and that wakes up Dad, who comes out with a sword, and with his sword unsheathed, and he and Don Giovanni are fighting. And Don Giovanni is younger and stronger, and Leporello is horrified. Nothing like that ever, well, I mean, lots of bad things had happened before, but nothing like that ever happened before. So Don Giovanni kills the chief of police, and there ensues a trio, 3 people serving at the same time. This Leporello, the servant, is singing, "Oh my God, this is terrible, nothing like this ever happened before." Don Giovanni is singing, that's all he could do. He could have put up a better fight, and rather casually. And of course, the chief of police is singing something rather much sadder as he is expiring. And we're going to hear all of that, and please see how quickly all of that is happening, and how the music shifts back and forth between completely different things: comedy, tragedy, farce. Well, no one can follow this much detail for No one can follow this much detail for 2.5 hours. And the opera is full of tuneful melodies and just charming numbers where you can sit down and rest. And Mozart has this wonderful ear and wonderful sense of where the listener will be getting tired of the details and when it's a good time to slow down. And given that this is about Don Giovanni, we should expect to hear serenades, and we should expect to see seduction scenes. And there are plenty of them in Don Giovanni, and those are some of the most popular numbers. And it is hard work to watch a Mozart's opera, but it is also a great way to relax by listening to these very charming numbers. And I selected 2 of them, a serenade and a seduction scene. The first serenade is called "Please Come to the Window." And let me play that. It's very short and sweet. Well, Mozart would not be Mozart if he didn't explain to us what drives Don Giovanni. Mozart does not do cardboard characters. He breathes life into all of his characters. He makes them musically into living and breathing human beings, and he wouldn't be satisfied with a Don Giovanni who is just being bad, just being a philanderer. He needs to explain that character psychologically. And that is up to him. There is nothing really in the text of the libretto to explain that. But Mozart took the view that what drives Don Giovanni is boundless energy, which probably could have been better used in other pursuits, but that's how he uses his energy. And this very short number that I'm going to show you illustrates that. What Don Giovanni is singing here is almost immaterial. It's called the Champagne aria, whatever. He's talking about how much he likes women and wine, but it's Mozart's music, the very energetic music. You have to hear it, that really explains Don Giovanni to us in this number. And that, from Mozart's point of view, is the driving force behind everything. And we've been talking about Don Giovanni probably a little too much and have seen a lot of clips with him. But he's after the women, all of the women he can see, and we must hear something from the women. So let's meet Donna Elvira, who had the bad luck of one day becoming a notch on Don Giovanni's belt. And here she is sharing the sentiment that should be well familiar to us. What she is singing is, this guy treated me so badly, he cheated on me, he betrayed me, he lied to me, I should be hating him, but I cannot stop loving him, I don't know what to do. And this is the 18th century way of musically expressing all these emotions. Well, I have more clips prepared, but sadly we have to skip through a couple of them, and it hurts me more than you to do that. But, oops. Oops. Huh? I'm sorry. Sorry about that. Oh. Okay, sorry about that. Well, we have to conclude at this point. And, in conclusion, what do I want to say? The title of the talk was Rediscovering Mozart, and I hope, well, we could all see that Mozart is infinitely more than those charming tunes that we come to associate with him. Really, what Mozart is about is storytelling, rhetoric, human emotions, human conditions, human drama, and expressing them individually and simultaneously, as well as it can possibly be done. Mozart music, of course, was composed in the 18th century. This is the 18th century musical language, and it's also the 18th century poetic language. But that's not Mozart's problem, that's our homework. And I think there are very few things in the world that are more rewarding than learning to understand what Mozart is trying to tell us. And, well, we have an opportunity to make that first step. Of all of Mozart's operas, Don Giovanni is probably the easiest to follow, the most fun, the most entertaining, and I encourage you to check it out and try it. One of the things that I could not possibly show you today, but you will experience if you do go to see this, is the amazing dramatic continuity for 2.5 hours of music. And of course, you will also enjoy much better sound quality and particularly much better video quality during the high definition broadcast. So that's all I had to say. Thank you very much for coming.